Hello and welcome to my video on hatches. This is really aimed at the sort of beginner or the Arb who wants to just update supplied site plans with a bit of enhancement. So I'll start by just drawing a few little shapes. Just for demo purposes. Let's stick one in there actually, there you go. So the hatch is this little symbol here, you just click it and it's asking you to define your hatch, and you can select your hatch style. I'll stick a solid for the demo, and there's other settings to play around with, and also these properties will come into play once we've made one. So there's two ways of making a hatch. You can pick the internal point, or you can select an object. If I click select objects, it's actually asking me to select something, because if I just click otherwise it won't do anything. It wants me to select a sort of closed shape, a shape with a boundary, not sort of open-ended preferably. But I'll start with pick internal point, which acts the same way as filling a colour in a paint program. It fills until it hits boundaries. If I click this one, it's filled it until it's hit the boundaries. Nice and easy. This one has filled to hit the boundaries, but it's also detected something inside which they call an island. It's another closed shape, so it's gone around that one. And this one has done the same. It's gone until it's hit the first sort of island and then stopped. But with these you can modify the island detection, and they call them normal, outer or ignore. So if I select ignore, it's ignored any islands. The outer one fills the main shape and then stops at the first island. I'll click to this one because this one is normal and it's a little bit complicated. It fills until it hits the first island, and then if it finds another island inside that one, it'll fill it. I can't imagine why anyone would want that, or at least not in our sort of line of profession. So generally we would have this set to outer. We wouldn't want that sort of double hatching going on. And there is a system variable which controls the default setting for that. So if you find your sort of, when you draw your hatches, this is happening and you really wish it wouldn't, you can just type in HP island, and it's actually coming up with options here. Island detection, HP island detection, and it's got the default value, and it's set to 1, which is the one we actually want. If it was set to 0, and I now did the hatches, it does the sort of double trouble one. And if it's set to 2, then it'll be none. But if it's set to 1, then it'll do the way we want it to do. So if you're finding that this little, you're getting 2 hatches going inside, then change your HP island detection just to number 1. Right, so I'll just get rid of these hatches. The other method for plotting is to use select objects. So if I select that, that is now asking me to pick an object. click that, fills it, click that, fills it, click that, fills it. And when you select an object, it is just going to fill that object. It's not like the fill method where it goes around things. It'll just fill the object, and that's really handy in a lot of cases, as you'll see. You can, if I select that first and then select that, it will sort of switch it back, which is a quick sort of workaround. Sometimes I use that rather than filling, flood filling as I call it. And you'll see why in a sec. So we'll just quickly look at the associative setting, because that is important to know about. I've selected a hatch and I've got my properties here, and it's saying associative yes, and it's highlighted up here. And that means the hatch is linked to the sort of boundary that defined it in the first place. So if I select the polyline, because there was a polyline before I filled it, and drag it, the hatch follows the polyline. It's associated with it. If I select associative and select it to no, and then select my polyline, it's no longer linked to it. Normally you always want it associated because it makes life a lot easier, but in some circumstances you may need it detached, but it's very rare, I think. So I'll just delete these, and we'll stick some hatching in on the plan. And I'm going to use pick internal point, solid, and give it a colour. So it's going to hatch this area for me. It's sort of giving me a preview. And enter. So this hatch is associative, but its boundaries, because it's sort of filled outwards from an internal point, its boundaries are made up of all sorts of bits and pieces of other objects, and that can give you problems if you want to shift, say, a boundary and you want the hatch to follow. Now normally it would if it can, because it is associative, but if I move that there, it can't, because I've created an opening. It doesn't know what to do with that. You know, it's going to flood all the way. It doesn't know what's going on, so it can't do it. And that can be a bit of a problem. You can get around it by selecting this little thing here, which creates a boundary, and it asks you for whether you want it as a region or a polyline. I'll click polyline, and do you want it to be associated with it? Yes please. And it's now created a polyline around the hatch, even though the hatch was using bits and pieces of other objects, other entities. It's now created a complete new boundary which it's associated with, so I can now move that and the hatch will follow it nicely. It's important to do that on sort of critical hatches where you know you might need to adjust it. Just create a boundary for it, its own boundary. You can hide it just by grabbing it and send it to the back so it's behind the hatch. And then if you ever want to get access to it, well, you can always just send the hatch behind the polyline. And of course, because I sent it to the back, this line, so I'd need to send this one to the back. And we've got our polyline back. But I think you'll find that you will most often just be defining small areas of hatching for ground protection or no dig or tree pruning or whatever, and you'll be using the select object method of defining the hatch. If I sort of do a little example down here, let's move this tree over here, and it's got a root protection circle around it. and it's sort of going, say, like that. Give that a colour, and then you would put your tree protection fencing around it, something like that, because you just want simple straight lines. You don't want to go all around this circle. It's very hard to put fencing panels 3.5 meters long around a circle. Give it a bit of width and some colour. So that's my tree root protection fencing, and of course it's completely useless because they need to build this house. This is a proposed house, we're going to say, and they need to get round here. They need to put scaffolding up, they need to walk around building the wall, etc. So we need to give an area, say with ground protection, that they can access, and then put the fencing behind that. And what I would normally do is draw a quick rough polyline around there, and then use the offset command, which we're going to cover in a later video, but it's a very handy command. I know this drawing's in meters, so I'm going to click that and enter an offset of 1.5. So I'm going to have a 1.5 meter wide sort of area around this building. Sometimes I use 2 meters, but 1.5 is sort of the minimum. And it's asking me to select the object to offset, which is this one. And whichever side I put the mouse on is the side it's going to draw it, so I'll draw it there. So this distance from there to there is 1.5 meters, 1.5 meters. And then I will grab polyline and draw my ground protection area. It's going to go roughly about there. So I go across to there, down to this corner, right click close. So I've got a closed little area there, and I can then hatch that, and it's set to pick internal point, and this sort of illustrates the problem with using that in this situation, because we'd have to do all these fragmented hatches. So I select object instead, and then I can just pick that and it does it all. And especially with a solid hatch, you should always send it to the back, so it's behind everything, so you can see what's going on. And then I delete these sort of guidelines we drew and adjust the fencing accordingly. Like so. And in this situation it might be easier just, you know, for the contractors, fencing contractors and the ground protection installation, just to extend this down to here. And because the hatch is associative, it's gone with the polyline, and then the fencing can just follow that. And because it's a straight line, I can actually get rid of that vertex. So we've got 1.5 meters room for them to put scaffolding up and come around this corner. The hatch boundary line I drew, and if I select that and the hatch and send them both to the back, they'll stay relative to each other order wise, but they'll both go back behind everything else, so the fencing is now on top of it and it's not so confusing. We've just got a line there and a line there to show the edge. And you would just annotate it obviously and put dimensions in. Put a dimension to there. Put a dimension to there so they can see where the Actually, I'll stick them in so they can see the extent of the ground protection. Use the circle, don't lock it to the line. That way the line can just sort of be indicative. And you can just stick one in here. I think in the last video we covered dimension styles, so I'm not going to go through that again, but these would be using your style. I can just quickly change the precision, add a suffix, and match that. And if the building isn't sort of plotted out, you may well just need to stick another one just to give them an idea of where this goes. So that's the sort of use for the hatch. It makes it very clear as to what's going on. I think you need to be careful about hatching just for the sake of hatching. You know, some people, they like to hatch all their RPA areas with pretty colours. And I think it's unnecessary to have too much hatching just for the sake of it. Keep it nice and simple, I say. So let's just look at the different styles. You can select them from up here, and you've got all these little choices. I tend to just use solid first of all. If I need another one as well as solid, I'll use the diagonal lines, then go for the crisscross. I'll just change the scale because, as you can see, you can hardly see it, and you have to juggle the scales to get them to a reasonable view. If I just give that a orange colour. So that's your diagonal, sort of double diagonal. I have had jobs where I've actually had loads of styles, and it can be a bit of a tricky juggling act to make them all look different. You know, that's diagonal with dots. That's, what is it, 4 diagonal lines together. I've used this one quite often. It's quite clearly different to others. And you've got things like grass. You know, sometimes people want me to show a bit of grass. If I can find it. There she is. And again, you've got to juggle the scales. In this case, you have green. And even a nice bit of, oops, I missed that bit, add a vertex there. Select object. So we can have a bit of block driving. Where's my block driving? I can find it. And as you can see, just a little bit there, so the scale is way too high. And that's one of the annoying things about these, is that they're not all sort of scaled with each other. And it can be tricky to work them out sometimes. But yes, occasionally I have to do a bit of block driving, a bit of lawn. Depends on what the plan is, you know. And the scale, you know, setting the scales can be a bit fiddly. Once you've got one, you can just sort of match it to others. If I was to, let me do my pick internal point to a few gardens. And then just use the match properties to change the hatches. But if, you know, this was diagonal, it's just a case of changing the scale here or up here till it's the way you want it. And with non sort of solid hatches, you can change the rotation. Change the angle of the lines. You may have noticed when I was drawing these 3 hatches here, although I clicked 3 separate points, it's actually created a sort of joined hatch, and that's because the default setting is to keep them joined together. You can change that. If you've got a hatch selected, you can see this options and just click separate hatches, and they're now all separate. And going forward, that setting will stay sort of set for you. So if I were to draw some more hatches, these are now all separate. And but you know, there's advantages to both. If you've got lots of hatches to do and they're all joined together, you can set all the scale and colours and styles, and then when you're happy with it, you can separate them or just leave them joined together. So it's a little useful option. Let's have a look at the background colour, because this is an option. You can have a fill colour and the line colour. Up here we've got options for a background colour. So you can sort of say, well, this area is, you know, one particular thing, and the one without the hatch is, the one without the background is another. And that's really it as an intro. If I just do another quick demonstration of something that might need to be done. You can turn off now if you're completely bored already. But if I've got, say, got my tree here, and you can see how this dimension is sort of stretched, it hasn't come with it because I had to lock it to this line because it's short of the circle, so it wants to stay there. But I'll just get rid of those. And I've got this RPA over this road of this proposal, and the client wants to put in no dig cellular drive specification of the road base, so we don't dig deep into the root protection area. So you would, you know, plot out your area using a polyline, go across, and you can see why I like to use my nearest and snap point settings by default. So I'll close that and hatch it. That was the internal point. I don't want that. I want select objects. And it's still using the grass because that's sort of the last one I was using. So I'm going to change that to the one I like to use for cellular, which is honey, and give it a different colour. And make the scale a bit bigger. Maybe not that big. And I'll send it to the back. So that would be my cellular area, and you would have your fencing around it as per normal. I'll just do it quickly here, it's not going to be precise. Something like that. But in this case you'd have to have some more fencing. You'd have something up here. And you would designate this different colour, different style perhaps, different line type. And you'd basically say, you know, this additional bit of fencing is to remain in place until they're ready to install this bit of driveway under Arb supervision. Once they've started, it's removed, but this bit remains. But of course, haven't allowed for workspace. They may well need workspace, and you might need to put ground protection along this edge, maybe a metre wide, and bring the fencing in. You need to sort of really think about what's going on, and if you haven't been to building sites and seen what happens there, they don't you know, they don't sit and read method statements, to be honest. You know, a lot of method statements, tree protection plans, they're literally just to get the planning permission, and don't see the light of day again. And then you just annotate it all, and you know, stipulate in your method statement the procedures here, supervision, etc. And that's it really. Just remember the two methods of the hatch selection, the pick internal point and the select object point. They both work in different ways, have different sort of advantages. So, see you on the next one. Thank you very much. Bye.